Talking Science with Yokes, Episode 2 with Alfia Ray. Hi, Alfia.
Hi, Rishita. Long time. Finally, we're connecting.
Yeah, it's really nice to see you, and congratulations on being a new mom.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So tell us, what is it you do?
So, I'm a speech language pathologist. So, basically, I deal with children who, have delayed speech with respect to various communication issues.
Mm-hmm.
And also in the geriatric setup where, post stroke, when, there's loss of speech or when there is a swallowing or feeding issues. Yeah. So, work with the population, both pediatric and geriatric.
How did you get into this field?
Well, that's not by choice, but by chance. Yeah, but somehow I'm glad by chance this happened, and I love what I'm doing right now.
That's awesome. Can you take us through a day of what it looks like in your field?
Okay, so let's say, post-COVID things had been, pretty slow because, we ourselves, engaged, not telling the pediatric population to come out more because of, the COVID scare out there.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, well, it's a round the clock job, and there we the best thing about this, it's all about children mostly, so we deal with a lot of children there, and it's lovely to be with them. And when you see that, a child who's probably has not had a single word for up to 4 to 5 years of life, and then after your work, suddenly they start speaking, so that joy is something, you really can't just describe it with words. And and the joy in the parents face when the children start communicating, it's wonderful. So we work with, let's say, children with ASD. So we start usually, let's say, 10 in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
so with respect to hospital visits and then therapy. So it's mostly when therapy comes into play, it's more of a play based therapy, as we work with children. So we strive to make it interesting for them, so that, they do get like, what they do when they come in, and they want to come in more and learn more.
At what age do you think somebody should be concerned to bring in their baby for you to look at them?
Okay, so looking at it first, we have a certain milestones. When you go to a regular pediatric visit, only the pediatric also should, the pediatrician should share with you, what are the regular milestones that we are expecting. So when
Mm-hmm.
we see that there is a certain milestone delay, let's say we're supposed to achieve the head and neck control, which is a motor development, a gross motor development for the child. It somewhere happens between 3 to 4.5 months.
Mm-hmm.
So when that is delayed, somewhere we know that, there is something that's happening there, which we need to be a little more cautious and, more alarmed about. So I would advise parents to stay alert, when we are noticing the minute of the milestone itself. So when it's falling on track, wonderful. So there's nothing for us to be alarmed from beginning. But when we see a slightest of the milestone being a little delayed, I think that's a red marker there where we're already, alert and we are watching for it. And when we see that there is a speech delay, so we expect by the time the child is 6 to 8 months, the child needs to start babbling. So any of the thing is going delayed from there, we need to be alert and alarmed. And I have children coming to me as early as 14 months of age, and as late as 6 years of age. So that's a very wide gap there. But we've always seen with evidence based practice that, the earlier that we're able to, get to the child, the earlier the child is able to get into the, normal regular routine, and carry on with his or her life without any help in the future.
Are there some things that parents can do, let's say with from 6 months to 12 months? So the place that you bring at work, are there things that they could do at home?
Sure, there are actually a lot of things that parents could do. Yes, the first thing is, spending quality time with your child. And, let's say the child is a month old. Let's say we have a newborn at home, and we think, what is a newborn going to do? All we're going to, probably feed the child and put the child to sleep is all what the child requires. But no. So the thing is, we need to keep talking to this child, and, the more of interaction, even though the child is only, seeing a blur at that age, the child is not really seeing our faces. But still, even that blur, that visual stimulation that we give, and an auditory stimulation as much as possible. Like you do the adult talk you're doing. So don't expect the child to understand and reply or respond back to you, but do the adult talk to the child. Just describe how your day was and how lovely it is outside. What is the scenery you're seeing now? Just keep talking to the child, and that's going to help the child, come up faster, first thing. And then when you notice that there is, okay, my child is falling back, start spending quality time with the child. There is immense material outside. So there's ABA Speech by Rose, and there are other few websites, who've shared free material for parents to work with the children. Yeah, so get going, just find your child, and just map your speech milestones with your child's milestones. If you see that there's a slight delay, spending quality time is the first thing that parents are supposed to do. It's not that nowadays we see all these parents just present the children with gadgets at a very, very young age. That's a big no. Please don't think that giving the gadget is going to make the child smart. It's exactly the opposite what it's doing to the child.
Do you see a difference in gender with reaching milestones?
Based on a lot of studies which has happened, they say, generally girl babies or the female babies tend to pick up on the milestones faster than the male children. But the difference is not huge. It's probably going to be a couple of weeks. That's the difference mapping that happens there. So almost it's similar. And when we also compare the children, probably comparing the same gender is important. So you might see that, my friend's daughter, spoke at 11 months of age. Why isn't my son speaking? He's already 13 months of age. So don't do that comparison. Rather, the milestones, the girls tend to seem a little faster than the boys there, but there's not much of a gap. So always do the gender to gender comparison. Don't do the intra-gender comparison.
Do you see a correlation between speech impairment and other things like, I know you talked about ADD, but also other picking up reading skills or math skills, performance in schools? Do you see a correlation between that?
Yeah, totally. See, not that all children who have a problem with mathematics or reading have speech problems, but almost all children who've been early identified with speech problems tend to have academic problems in the future. Yeah, so it's kind of, so when we early identify, that's like, gold standard. The earlier you identify the child, you work with the child, that, my child is falling short there. So you give him the utmost stimulation where required, then probably you're saving him the future time. Yeah, but as you said, yeah, there is a correlation that we see almost all children who have, typically atypically developing children with speech and language issues tend to have academic issues in the future. But let's say it's not to a severe extent. A little help would do at that point of time for them to get out of that.
How many geriatric cases do you see, and how do they be brought upon in older people?
Okay, so when we see geriatric cases, it's mostly, post-stroke. What happens, a brain injury, a brain stroke is basically what hampers speech, language, or, swallowing issues. So whenever it hampers the speech and language, it's mostly what we term it as aphasia. So aphasia is something which is, it could be global, where, understanding of the language and the speaking is impaired. Or there are components which can be separately also affected. Like a person could understand what we are speaking, but would be unable to produce the correct response with respect to the motor production. Yeah, and then there's other class of people who probably do not understand what you're talking. When you're trying to convey a message, they don't understand, but then their speech output is extremely normal. So I might ask you a question, how are you today? They might end up answering, I had dosa for my breakfast. So you might find it silly, but it's a real life problem for them. Yeah, because they know the right response, they're able to follow it, but they're not able to produce it, is one class. And the other class is they're able to produce all sort of responses, but understanding is hampered. So we mostly see them post-stroke, and it is a quite long process, because at that age recovery gets a little slower. But then there are a lot of wonderful people who have come across this and who are as good as normal today.
In pediatric cases, what is the reason behind speech impairments?
Well, that's an umbrella question to be answered. Yeah, so when we say speech impairment, well, there's now that's a big umbrella term, as I said. So let's say a child has articulation issues. So the child is unable to produce sounds like l and r. So this might be basically because the child is been born with the tongue tie. So tongue tie, probably the child is unable to, present his tip of the tongue to the palate, how we usually produce. So that would be one of the reason. Or let's say the child has a cleft in the palate congenitally when he was born with. So even though he's able to place the tip of the tongue there, the palate is not covered. Hence he's unable to produce the speech efficiently. And then if we say language issues, now as we said ASD or ADHD, the child when he develops this, and now we see, a lot of ASD and ADHD is a result of the screen time that's happening. At least let's say 70 to 80% of the children develop atypically because of the screen time. Yeah, so it's a bigger class, and there are a lot of things that could hinder. Or some children just generally have delayed speech and language because of lack of stimulation. So both the parents are working, they're busy on their laptops, and the child is busy with the mobile phone in the hand, and hence the language delay.
You talked about swallowing issues. Is that called?
Yeah, now swallowing issues, when we talk about that, that's again what we see also in children and also in geriatric population. So when we, let's say with the pediatric population, as we mentioned, a cleft lip or a cleft palate. So what happens is, now probably the child is going to be, breastfeeding is going to be a bigger challenge when the child has a cleft of palate. Because when the child breastfeeds, because there's a fissure or an opening in the palate, there's high chance that the breast milk is going to leak into the nose, the eustachian tube. So, and there's immediate regurgitation from the nose, and there's probably a blocking the ears. So hence feeding becomes a traumatic experience for the child, and hence the child refuses to feed. Yeah, and also once even you start the solids, it's not a very pleasant experience when you have a cleft. Hence the swallowing issues. And also we see the swallowing issues with premature children. So children who are born preterm, let's say between 28 to 34 weeks when they are born, so the lungs have not developed to full capacity. So a food pipe or windpipe actually lie very close to each other. So hence, latching upon and then suckling efficiently becomes a bigger challenge when they are preterm. So that's where we work with respect to the pediatric population. With respect to geriatric, so we call this condition as dysphagia. So which is, a problem in swallowing. So there is a lot of what happens is, and also in dysarthria and dysphagia. So what happens is post-stroke. Now stroke, when it happens to the brain, the thing is that is internal. Right, so internally there's a left side paralysis or the right side paralysis. So that same thing happens towards the entire body. So the entire body, so there's weakening of the limbs. So the person is not able to efficiently walk as before. So the same muscles which are there inside, so it applies to your oral cavity also. So the tongue movement would be affected, and then efficiently swallowing is affected. So as soon as they take in, they don't understand that the food is getting pooled with their buccal cavity, or when there is a leakage that's happening, or the drooling that's happening, or sometimes they experience pain while swallowing because of the weak musculature. So we work with them to bring about that change in swallowing and how slowly. So we change the texture of the food that they're supposed to take in. So based on the patient profile, we turn it whether it's liquid diet or a semi-solid diet, or then how will we convert them into the solids.
How has COVID affected the way you interact with your patients?
COVID, well, yes, you see now a lot of things has come online. The offline things have gone down, and as I said, no, for children, we say a big no to screen time. But now we are forced to take therapy via screen, which is such a, it's such a bad thing to do. But somehow we cannot stop, what the child is getting, because something is better than nothing. So we try to coach the parents, and then the parents work with the children. Yeah, so that's the first pediatric COVID intervention post-COVID that's happening. And with respect to geriatric, yes, the hospitals kind of, it was COVID overflow, so the other patients were not getting the care that they were getting before. Slowly now in India, things are getting back to normal. So I think looking forward, things are better now, hopefully. And we should get back the full swing that we were before.
So as a new mom, what kind of support do you think you need to make the transition back to work or even maintain a good work-life balance?
Okay, so the first thing, it's, your family needs to be supportive. And when you say family, it's your partner who comes first. Yeah, and then it's first it's you, the willpower to get back to work there, and to have that, and to leave the mom guilt behind and then go back and get back to your work life. And then comes your partner who needs to be supportive there, and because your infant needs your care too. So somewhere when you're ready to go and jump back into the field, he needs to support you, take care of the child at that particular time. And as a society, well, see, in a lot of other offices you get this perfect 6 months maternity leave and you can go ahead with it. But as with our profession, there's no such term as maternity leave. It's as long as you want, stay back at home or get back to work. So it's your call to make. So I got back to work 23 days after my infant was born. Yes, so I would say it was my will to get back, and also the number of patients waiting for you. That's also, you have your mom guilt there, and also you have this other guilt where you make your patients wait, and there's some child who needs the care and who can't be delayed more than that. So hence getting back was there. And work, it was not great, the work. Initially it was very poor. It took me at least a couple of weeks to understand that yeah, my infant is safe back at home now. I can work for this couple of hours and then get back. So the best thing about is, my job is not 9 to 5. It does not require me to, log in and log off at that stipulated time. So I've been on and off. So whenever my patient is there, so I try to organize between that, and pumping is helping a lot. So when I'm not there, I make sure that my child is still being, breastfed, and I've not introduced formula. So things were rough, but now getting smooth for sure.
Do you get any patients who just come to you just for aesthetic purposes, like just to have a better voice?
Yeah, the thing is, a lot of, as you said, no, a lot of singers, probably when there's tremendous use of voice, or there are teachers, if you have to talk on the voice parameters, or even for, say, the speech therapist, where a lot of vocal volume is required for us to spend our work time. So yes, in due course of time, there do appear some problems because of that. So they develop some vocal nodules or polyps, which affects the voice quality. And sometimes, let's say, for speech therapists or teachers, we give rest, and we don't mind about the beauty of the voice, probably. But when it comes to singers or an orator who is using the voice for the living, they require that pitch, they require that throw. So that's when they come in for therapy, of course, for the aesthetic purpose, to keep your voice as good as it was. And they do, of course, a lot to keep good practice of their voice, because that's their living, that's what they need to earn their bread and butter with. So yes.
So if someone wants to get into this field, where do they start?
So I can talk to you about the Indian context, because I am not very aware of what's the Western way of getting into this. So the first thing is once you need to have 11th and 12th, what you call, or the first and second PU in India. So you take the science stream. So you complete that, and then you have different colleges which are particularly dedicated to this. So one of the most famous colleges is AISH, which is in Mysore, which is called All India Institute of Speech and Hearing. So they have an entrance examination. So you need to qualify with that entrance examination. And then you get into it, which is a 4-year course. The first course is for 4 years, which includes 3 years of, your classes, and then 1 full year of internship at different setups. So that's called BSLPA, Bachelor's in Speech Language Pathology and Audiology. And post that, you do your master's, which is again, you need to give an entrance to clear and then get your master's going. So there again, you have 3 options into your master's. You can either only specialize with respect to audiology, or with respect to only speech pathology, or you can end up doing both, which is master's in speech and audiology, so based on the interest that you have. Yeah, and once you're done with both, your working potential is very good, because you can work in schools, you can work in hospitals, institutes, clinics, or welfare setups. There's a multidisciplinary team that you should be a part of. So whenever a child is diagnosed with a problem of speech, so it is an umbrella, as we said. So there is a physiotherapist who's coming into play, there's an occupational therapist, and there's a speech pathologist or therapist who comes into play, and then there's a developmental pediatrician. So it's always a multidisciplinary approach which works there. And all I would say is, end of the day, you might probably earn lakhs when you probably become a software engineer or whatsoever, but the satisfaction that you have at the end of the day when you see that smile on the parent's face, or that love that you receive from your children, is probably more than what you would earn in your lifetime.
That's really nice. Is there something that I didn't cover that you'd like to talk about?
Okay, so let's say tips for parents, where we're looking at now. So till now, see, I was working with children of, not my children, as in the parents were different, but of course they were my children because they came to me. But now, because I'm with a newborn day in and day out, I can see the nuances of the newborn and how they actually want us to communicate with them. So you have to, parents, I would just tell look out for that small signs that when your child wants to communicate to you, and always be responsive to that smallest communication the child is making with you. The more you do that, the more you don't have to come to us.
Is it okay to talk about religion?
Yeah, of course.
So can you tell us what it feels like in the current situation in India, being a Muslim in India?
Well, that it's such a question. See, always proud to be an Indian. Always was an Indian, is an Indian, I'm going to be Indian. But somehow, just because you're a Muslim, your nationality and your patriotism is always questioned. You have, you probably don't have a problem with the country for sure. You have the problem with the way the government works, and then you're immediately labeled anti-national. And you're a Muslim, you're just given the visa immediately to go to Pakistan. That's not an option. That's like an opportunity. And people, I would say, just before, if we trace back a few years, probably I don't even know discussing religion with my friends. I don't even know how religion was a factor into anything. But now, of course, couple of years, we know how things have been, and with respect to the internet, the trolling, there's no opinion to make, basically. So the moment you make an opinion, and if you're, as you said, if you belong to the majority religion, you're an anti-national. And if you belong to the religion that I belong to, you're immediately a terrorist. You might be a well-qualified professional helping people who are in need and whatsoever, and lived in this nation, and probably not even broken the traffic rules as now, but you've become a terrorist already. So it's kind of bad, but I'm sure that things will change. People will see things in better light, and there are a lot of people who are still good. Actually, I should say the majority of people still know what's wrong, but there's a small group of people who are easily brainwashed and who are getting carried away by the name of religion. Probably they will see light soon and understand that governments or politics, they just want to earn your votes, and hence they divide you. At the end, it's your friends who's going to stand with you, and to make friends you don't need to see religion. To be more honest, I'm married to a Hindu. Ours was a love marriage, and probably I was married 3 years back. Would have been a different scenario if things were elevated, or probably if I belonged to a different religion and if I was marrying a Muslim guy, things would have been way more different. They would have immediately termed it a love jihad, or whatever name that they are giving it right now. But yeah, for us also it was not smooth, because both the sides were restrained. They did show some resistance, but at the end of the day, I think our families were a little more forward and open to things, and neither did I convert, nor did my husband convert. So religion was never a point for us, even when we were in love or when we got married, and it still not is. So we have a daughter now, and probably we're not going to teach her what religion is. No, it's up to her whether she wants to know what religion is, and she's going to read and learn about that by herself. Yeah, so that's how it is. So for me, religion was never a question, nor will it be ever a question.
I love that, and I hope more people look at it that way in this world.
Yeah.
We're all supposed to be together. We're just finding more ways to be more separated.
Yeah, and my motto is, the moment someone talks more about any religion, the moment they're going to heap praises on their God, I'm going to move away from that person, whether irrespective of the religion. If a person is going to follow religion more than humanity, then it's better to stay away from that person, whosoever may that be, whether he belongs to religion A, religion B, religion C. Anyone who gives more importance to religion than friendship, than humanity, it's better to stay a little far apart and just say hi and bye to that particular person.
I love that. Thank you so much, Alfia, for spending time away from your baby girl. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
doing this.
Thank you for having me. It was wonderful talking to you.
You too. Thank you so much.